I'm now here to start the final part of the Checkmk conference, and we always wrap up the conference with a talk about our roadmap. And yeah, I think I'm just going to kick it off. I made some last-minute changes because we have introduced a new offering to Checkmk yesterday, and that is Checkmk Prime Delivery. And you can basically ask on the conference for a feature and you get it delivered next day. Who of you wanted the hardware-software inventory REST API? Raise your hand who wanted that. Yes. And now look at that. Yesterday at, can't see the time, I think at 3:58, Simon wrote that piece. It's not completely done because OneTech still has to say OK. But I think we will probably in the next days have the REST API endpoint for that. Yeah, that's our new feature for the Checkmk conference. And thanks, Simon, because I think this is a really cool initiative that you did. And that's also basically a transition into how we think about building Checkmk. Because for us, it's quite important that we build Checkmk for you. It's not a tool for us. Yeah? It's a tool which should help you. So we always need to listen to what you actually need and what you want and how we can make that right. And for that, it's also important to understand for you how we do the roadmap and how these things come together. And therefore, I'm just going to give a short overview on how we make the Checkmk roadmap. And the first piece as an input for that is we have a product vision. Jan spoke about it. I will also repeat it in a second. But that is an important piece because it gives us a direction where we want to head with Checkmk. It gives us a perspective over the next 5 years what we want to achieve, because things sometimes take some time until we really get there. And that's a little bit our product vision so that we know what do you actually want to achieve with Checkmk. The other thing is the conference, and as you have seen, we listen to your feedback, we actually collect your feedback at the knowledge fair. Every time when we do the roadmap, we go through all the conference votings. We remember actually we also created in our Jira tool now a epic where we have collected all the feedback which we've got, every developer, every product manager, every consultant who basically got discussions from you and had basically got an idea from you guys. We basically put it into that epic inside Jira so that we can track and discuss internally how we can follow up on these things. So it's really important to us what you say to us. Then all of you have decided for Checkmk at some point, but not everyone has decided for Checkmk. And our sales team actually knows the people who at some point said Checkmk is not the right tool for them. And our goal is obviously that we get more and more people to use Checkmk. So we also listen to our sales team if they have an idea, if they learned something during a discussion with a customer who didn't actually go for Checkmk. We basically also take that into our roadmap. And then we have our support engineers, and that's always a journey. When you start as a support engineer at Checkmk and you used to be a Checkmk admin before, then you, as a Checkmk admin, you think it works quite okay, right? When you then become a Checkmk support engineer and you get all the support tickets, you start to lose your mind because you think, how many bugs does the software have? How many problems does the software have? That's why it's for us very important that we listen to our support engineers and start to fix topics they encounter over and over again. For example, that's why we fixed also the automation user, because they saw that over and over again in the product. Then we have, I think, around 60 software developers at Checkmk who need to work efficiently with the software, who need to be efficient at work. So it's quite important that we also do things which make their life easier, because every minute they save in working on Checkmk, they can produce more stuff. So in every roadmap, and that's stuff we don't talk about here, there's also stuff we didn't talk about yesterday, but we always do fundamental changes to the architecture of Checkmk in every release. You'll only see if stuff doesn't work anymore. That's typically one of the outfalls of that. But it helps us in the end to become more efficient and productive. And the good thing is engineers always look at quality. That's very important because in the end we want a high quality product, and they always force us to reduce tech debt, which is very good. And we also talk a little bit about what kind of tech debt we will solve as part of Checkmk 2.5. And lastly, we have the Ideas Portal. And the Ideas Portal is also something every release, every roadmap cycle, we look at it, we think, what are all the topics in it? Where can we get inspiration? What are things which really matter to users? And then we can consider that. And in the end, this is a huge list of topics which we have. I think this time was more than 500 items which we collected before. And then the difficult piece starts because we have to boil it down. We have to reduce it because we can't do 500 things. And some of them are super large, some of them are super small. So what we actually do is we boil them down into what we call initiatives. Initiatives are larger topics, are basically something where we then also can give more freedom to the individual teams to then come up how they want to solve something. And initiatives give you basically an idea what kind of topic do we want to solve, but we don't say yet how we solve that. And once we have formed these initiatives, and it's typically around 10 per release, we start to look again, for example, at the Ideas Portal. And because at that point we have said, last year, we want to fix notifications. Then, when we said, okay, let's fix notifications, we look into the Ideas Portal. What ideas do users have around notifications? And then we incorporate that into the decision-making process to say, what should we actually do? We also have a quite big UX backlog because every time Tanya and her team speak to users, a lot of things come up. And we also consider them because we say, hey, if you have some topic, some initiative which we want to solve, is there something which we can incorporate from that backlog into it? And that, in the end, provides a roadmap. But there's one step before. Yeah? In product management, you do at some point something like discovery. And in discovery, you do a lot of user feedback. You do surveys, you talk to users, and as part of that, you understand how you should really do it. So that's basically the last step. And only then we have a roadmap, and only then we decide what we actually do. So it's a long step before we actually get productive, because this is important, because in the end, it is key that we do the things right and that we do the right things. And speaking about the Ideas Portal, I think it's always worth to refer to it because I mention it all the time, and I want to highlight a couple of things about it. Yeah? The first thing, it's a great source of inspiration for us. We have one person who is looking at it all the time. Every morning, he checks the Ideas Portal. Is there something new? Is there a new comment? And takes care of them. Because we want to maintain that, and we want to have that as a good place where you can give us feedback and where you can share ideas. And they matter to us, and we need to, however, manage the expectations around it. Yeah? Because there are, I think, around 1,000 ideas now in it. We will not be able to do all of them. And the number of votes, they do matter, but they are not the only criterion. In the end, we always consider how much value does it produce and how much effort is it. And that balance we have to strike, because if something has a lot of value but has even higher effort, it's something which might lose against another topic which has maybe less value but almost no effort. That's always the balance which we need to strike. That's why also we do not work the Ideas Portal top-down. We'd rather decide, as you see before, directions, initiatives which we want to do, and then we get inspiration from the Ideas Portal on how we solve things within it. And let's take the positive spin out of it. If you look at it, 116 ideas have already been implemented. That's really a lot. And there are things in there which are super large. If you take a look at it, support piggyback from remote hosts. We had one team working for several months to get that done. That was not a simple thing. You heard Moritz yesterday how we solved it. And these are the things which we do. Every release, you see fake check results, which resulted in Checkmk 2.3 in test notifications as a feature. After that, Tanya said, we need to fix notifications as part of that. And so therefore we said, after 2.3, let's fix notifications. So that one single idea kept us busy for 2 releases. So I hope this also emphasizes it's an important piece for us. So be active. We really look at that test, at all the ideas. Now, I mentioned the product vision, so I'll just reiterate on that. We basically look at the IT world in where are the workloads, so in a data center or in the cloud, and then what kind of workloads are there, infrastructure, applications, or the user experience. And these two lenses are really important for us because this shapes a little bit how we see the monitoring world and how we do our product vision. And for the one part, that's hybrid IT monitoring, so the ability to monitor anything in the data center and in the cloud. That's one of the key dimensions of how we decide on things. Then last year, we introduced synthetic monitoring. And this year, we went into the application space, into the application monitoring space. That follows the idea of full-stack observability. And along these two dimensions, we try to build a complete product. Let's first step into the hybrid IT monitoring piece. And now I have always a disclaimer, because the roadmap is subject to change. Whatever you see in the next slides might come for 2.5. We really try to do it, but things might change. Lars might come around with another idea in October, and then we might have to change things again, right? So you never know. That's why we will also see a couple of things which you have seen last year already, which we decided to put again on this year's roadmap, because just because we couldn't do it last year doesn't mean we shouldn't do it anymore. So some things might sound familiar, and some things we actually also decided last year we don't do it because we rather do them right instead of just rush them. So when it comes to our core product, to what really is the heart of Checkmk, we always have the following product principles. Yeah? And for us, that's the ability to monitor anything with a powerful configuration, with the ability to alert and analyze data, supported by a great user experience and extensible interfaces, running on a secure and scalable platform. And we jump into the monitor anything piece. And for that, also have a short disclaimer, because how we do stuff in that area is that we have commissioned projects. So people come to us and say they want something. Every once in a while, we open up the queue. It somehow magically always fills itself. We have support requests. So whenever you do a support ticket and have a minor wish, we actually also fulfill them. And their code contributions, they can become quite big. For example, Andreas's Redfish mainline took Moritz, I think, 3 weeks to get done, right? Because there are a lot of things to make our CI happy, so that in the end we can properly test it all the time and that we can ensure it works as we need it. So these things, they take some time. These things are unplanned. That's why I can't talk about them, because I don't know with what idea someone comes around in the next couple of months. We always basically have some flexibility around that. What I can talk about is strategic developments. Things which we say we need to do, and that's what we're going to talk about now. And for that, I have, again, a little framework. It looks really similar to before, and we talk about hardware in the beginning. And the first topic is about management boards. We already heard today new ways how you can monitor management boards with Checkmk, and if you're not aware of what management boards are, just a little refresher. Management boards are the little thing there, this controller, for example, and you can use them for remote management. They're often embedded, but it's important, it's typically an independent component. Yeah? It has very often its own network connection, so it basically runs independent. Yeah? It has a lot of helpful monitoring information. It can access hardware sensors to see, for example, temperatures, fan speed, voltages, and so on. And in Checkmk, you can configure it like that, for example. So there is in the host properties an area called management board. We can then enter and to monitor it via IPMI or SNMP. And then in the end, you get this very nice view with all the management board information services next to the agent. That, however, has an issue. Yeah? And it splits really the Checkmk community, because half of you probably say, yes, Martin, what you will say now is right. The other half will say, I don't understand why you think so. And therefore, I need to explain it a little bit again. Yeah? If you think about it from a monitoring perspective, on a server, you might have the operating system where the agent is running. You can connect to it via a IP address, and on another IP address, you might be able to connect to the baseboard management controller. And the problem from a monitoring perspective is that how do you deal with states then? If, for example, as before, you have configured them in the same host, what happens if the baseboard management controller is down and the server is up, vice versa? Is it up or down? And the thing is, Checkmk is not quantum physics. We always need a clear state. We need a definite state. The other problem are duplicate services, and that is more a pain for our developers. And therefore, what we rather have in Checkmk is distinct hosts, because then one can be down while the other's up. Therefore, what we typically recommend is you do it as a dedicated host. You can use SNMP, IPMI, and now also Redfish for it. Has one drawback. They will not appear together in the UI. And last year, I already talked about that last year, right? Last year we had already ideas. We said, okay, let's think about it. How should it look like? We had some proposals internally, some design ideas. They looked like that. Yeah. So just imagination. Yeah. This is not how it will look like probably, but we had these internal ideas which we wanted to test with users. Yeah. So maybe we just put some relationships in there between hosts. And maybe then we also put it into the services view, that we say, hey, how can we make that happen in the services view? Didn't like it too much because you lose a lot of space, yeah, in the view. So maybe something like that. And once we started going into the topic, we realized the UI piece you can get somehow done, but how about configuring it? Because in the end, what we want is that really in the configuration, it's two dedicated objects. They're independent. And in the UI, we connect them. But once you start thinking about that, you realize this is only one relationship style which you can have. A management board belonging to a server. But if you then start thinking about it, and that's what we did, you realize this is not the only relationship which you will have. You'll also need the relationship between other things. For example, the app server will be connected to a DB server typically. And so you start to think about modeling host relationships. And that's the moment where you think, OK, we need to get that right, because otherwise we have management boards 2.0. And it's something which will haunt us forever. And we thought, OK, how could you do that? So you need at least one option that you can set them explicitly, for example, the host properties. And then you have another Checkmk problem. Let's say you don't have that host configured yet, because you probably start first with the server and then with the management board. How do you do that? And we had basically the idea, let's add something under related hosts. We can then say, hey, what kind of relationship is it? I'm a management board, and the management board for that, you can then, for example, configure like that. However, that technology didn't exist back then yet. Now it exists. So now we can actually do that you can do that on the fly. So there were some prerequisites which led us that let's do that right, but let's therefore wait until this release, because now we can actually do it right. Because we need this ability to set hosts explicitly, but we also need the ability to set host relationships dynamically. So we, for example, need something like that you can say, hey, map all these hosts which fit that expression to these hosts. And also, what kind of relationship is it? And that can then become something really cool, because we can then start connecting hosts in the UI. How it will look like, we have a lot of opportunities to do, but we can have this relationship between hosts. And then the most important piece is that at some point we can also do that we can use that for alerting. Because this is, I think, one of the major pain points, that if a switch goes down or is gone, everything behind is also not reachable anymore. You can use parent-child relationships, of course, but it's not ideal. So therefore, we said for Checkmk 2.5, let's first get the UI connection done, because this is the one thing which we need to get rid of the host property feature of management boards. And then after that, let's utilize that functionality in the future to model host relationships for alerting. So one very big topic just for hardware. Let's talk about the next layer, virtualization. And in virtualization, we have to speak about one big topic, and that's VMware. And Don't know who of you is affected, but I think to almost every customer I speak to, they are affected by that. They basically talk about what can we do to get away from VMware. And these discussions led, for example, to the fact that the virtual appliance in Checkmk is now, or in the next 2 weeks, going to be available for Hyper-V, because it's something where we really see users saying we need to move away from it. We get a lot of pressure inside the business to move away from VMware. And therefore, we also thought, how can we actually utilize that, or what do we need to do? Because we can either wait for you or move away from VMware to something else, and then go to us and say, hey, you need monitoring for that, or we are proactive about it. And therefore, we said, we looked a little bit into what software solution or what solution do users go to. And what we heard from you is basically 3 different areas. For the people looking for commercial solutions, most of them are looking for Hyper-V or Nutanix to go to from VMware. There's also another entire group of people who basically say, we use now the opportunity to go to an open source solution, and what we typically hear is Proxmox. And lastly, the people who basically say, let's just ditch that entirely and just go to cloud-native solutions, go to Kubernetes, or go to the cloud. And when we then looked at that, we said, okay, what is the consequence for us? How should we evaluate that? So we said, how good is our monitoring for these things? And so I think for Nutanix, thanks Andreas, the monitoring is not quite good. For Hyper-V, I would say it's okay. For Proxmox, it's also okay. For Kubernetes, obviously I have to say that, it's fantastic. And for our cloud monitoring, it's I think also quite okay. And but what do I mean actually with okay? Let's take a look at it. This is our Proxmox monitoring. And it's actually not bad, right? You get, together with the agent data, you get a couple of piggyback services, which give you, for example, information about the backup state. That's what you get for VMs. On the host system, you might get stuff like that. For example, that you get also agent data plus the data from Proxmox. And with the Ceph plugin, which we now have, you get actually quite rich information. So it's actually not bad, right? But if you compare it with our Nutanix monitoring or also with our vSphere monitoring, it's just not on the same level. I just brought the Nutanix monitoring, where you, for example, have all the insights into a cluster. We have the insights into nodes, into VMs, which is much more rich. And final clap for Andreas, because he provided that to us. So what do we plan now? We basically, therefore, as a consequence said, let's get our Proxmox monitoring to fantastic. And the people I saw with the Proxmox shirts, you can do your pull request, right? And for Hyper-V, we will also go to a fantastic level and try to reach it. And this is basically the 2 big topics we want to achieve, so that when you and if you decide to move away from vSphere, Checkmk is there for you and ready for you. For virtualization, we need to talk about one more thing. And we have something, I mentioned we look at the ideas portal, we do look at the ideas portal. And we have the Podman check, which has more than 200 votes, actually probably in the top 10 of the requests. And we have good news. We already have, so this is a mock-up, important, yeah. We already have ideas how that should look like, so we already started working on it. We specified it internally. We looked into the Podman API, what kind of data can we get out of it, what services do we want to have. We already verified it also with one user who's intensively using Podman. And so the biggest part of that thing is already done, so it's just about now implementing it, which is not that much work typically. So for virtualization, we have Podman, Hyper-V, and Proxmox. Now, on the layer above, on operating systems, what do we plan there? And I have one question for you guys. Who is using the Windows log monitoring? And the log monitoring which gives you these things. Lars, you have to raise your hand.
Not easy because it depends. Sometimes in special configuration, yes. Normally, no.
Yeah, normally no, sometimes. Yeah, I think this, and this is actually where I asked one of our support engineers, what do you want most in Checkmk 2.5? And he said, this needs to be fixed. because he typically doesn't recommend it to users. Hey. And our main idea is, but we are quite open to any ideas which you have, so please approach us afterwards. The main topic why we think this needs to be fixed is because you need to first understand what it is, what we have there, because it's an integrated log watch which the Windows agent does. And that means basically for all event logs, it will just out of the box get the log stuff in, and then you have the quirky log watch to get all that stuff. And that comes with everything which you get with log watch, right? Except the one feature which you might need, and that is, for example, in the agent, what you can configure. What can you configure? Let's first take a look at that. We can say which event logs do you want to get in. Do you only want to have the crits, the warrants in there, or nothing, with context or without context? But there's one thing missing. You can't filter. And that can become very painful, because then you get all the stuff. And you get really a lot of things. And that could really lead to a lot of pain then in the event console. And then you might wonder, isn't there already a solution for that? Haven't you figured that out already? And then you look at MK Log Watch, at how you can configure the agent plugin, and you see, hey, you can do that there. You can basically say, these kind of messages, just ignore them. These are critical, these are warn. And the idea and the solution, what we had in mind, is quite easy, but I'm very happy to listen to any other feedback then. We just said, the easy thing how we solved it is that we basically implement the filtering functionality there as well, and so that the built-in Windows Agent Log Watch becomes much more powerful and usable. So then there are a couple of things which just need to be done, because none of you will want to open a ticket for that, or basically you expect these things to be done by us. And that's, for example, getting rid of VBS, so Visual Basic Script. And we have good news, because it's already done. In Checkmk 2.5, you will not find any Visual Basic Script anymore. And maybe nice for you guys, we moved to PowerShell, so you can continue editing it. Then the Windows System Time Service is also something which our support engineers told us we need to fix and get a proper time sync and a proper time quality check in place for that. Then netstat we'll also get rid of. At some places we already got rid of it. We'll try to get rid of it everywhere in Checkmk. And lastly, doesn't really belong to operating systems, but it's just something where it fits really nice into that list. Microsoft really likes to get rid of the APIs and change them all around all the time. And I think 1 year ago, we moved to EWS to do the check mail monitoring for Microsoft Exchange. Now we'll move to Microsoft Graph, because Microsoft is getting rid of EWS as well in October 26, so still some time. But if you think about it, Checkmk 2.5 will come out next year in 26, so that you have enough time to continue monitoring without any interruption. So we talked about operating systems now. We talk also now about applications. And for applications, there's one big piece in Checkmk which we are very proud of, but it's also a problematic piece, and that's our Oracle monitoring. Because I think it's a really good monitoring. I think we have one of the best Oracle monitoring solutions out there. And to understand a little bit about the pain, we need to understand a little bit about the history of it, and also why it is so good. Yeah? Why is it so good? Because it can handle almost all Oracle setups. Just look at the agent configuration. It works on Linux, Solaris, AIX, and Windows. And you have a lot of options which you can configure. So it has really grown over the time based on the requirements you as users had. And it was initially developed 14 years ago by Matthias and by Thorsten. Thorsten provided all the Oracle expertise, and Matthias did what he called himself shell hacking. And that shell hacking now has grown to more than 3,000 lines of code. You can see actually Matthias himself said it's shell hacking. Yeah? And these 3,000 lines of bash code are problematic for us, because they are on the one hand side hard to code. If you've written something that complex as MK Oracle, you realize it's not easy to maintain that. And the other thing, it's even harder to test that code. And therefore, we said, we will rewrite it. We will rewrite it. I mean, I don't care which language. Developers can decide that, as long as it's not Bash. And as part of it, we will also extend the test coverage strongly so that we can actually do changes in the future. And now you might wonder, why do you actually need to care? Because what are your benefits? And there are the bad news for you, because you will have no benefits. I mean, that's except, of course, yeah, you will get the same checks and same services. And the only thing you need to do is to migrate then the agent plugin. That's our goal. And now you might still wonder, like, why do I care? Because, I mean, should you care? It's really important because it's the enabler for the future for us, because then eventually what we can do is, I mean, on one hand side, we'll get much more stability. So when we do any changes, we can ensure that it doesn't break. And the other thing is we can then deliver new features again for MK Oracle much faster. OK, so now we have looked at the left part, at what we want to do for the data center. Oh, I have to wait. Sorry, I forgot something. Thomas, you have waited long enough now. There's one thing which you asked me 2 years ago to finally get into Checkmk. And I think every conference, every partner day, he comes to me and says, can you finally get that into Checkmk? Because what you have in Checkmk is OK for Cisco Meraki. But what I have is more usable, more to the feeling of him. And the curious thing is that Thomas is actually not a Checkmk admin. He wears a Checkmk t-shirt, but it's not his day job. Like most of you earn your money with Checkmk. Thomas actually doesn't. He earns his money with being a network specialist. And whenever he does something, he does it in his free time. So whenever I have an issue and want something from him, I remember I wanted him to explain me the Cisco Meraki monitoring, which he did 2 years ago. And he said during the day he has no time because he has to do his normal work, but we can talk in the evening. And therefore, I think it's really now time that we get that in. We promised, so I think we will get, really this release, we will get it. Yeah. I say that every year. But this year I put it on slide, so I have to do it. Yeah. And why is it cool? Because you can also then get this. Because the cool thing for Cisco Meraki, it will also provide all the information for network topology. And our goal is that you can then the only thing which you need is the tool, the network visualization data creation tool by Thomas, to get these things. That's our ambition, because this is really cool. We always hear from every user when they see it, they want that. And you can get it, but it needs some work from your side at the moment. I think for Cisco Meraki, it should be easier to get it. Yeah, he's nodding, so that's good. But we don't want to stop there. And it's a little bit more for stretch. But we also want to integrate all the other plugins which he developed for inventory data, so that in the end, the only thing, if you want to, for example, have a LLDP or CDP-based network visualization for your entire network infrastructure, the only thing which you then need is the network visualization data creation tool. It's a really German name, right? You need to come up with a better name. And that's the ambition then, yeah, so that you only need that, and the rest comes with Checkmk. OK, now I'm really done with the data center stuff. Let's talk about the cloud stuff. And for the cloud stuff, you might wonder, like, guys, what do you need to do? Don't you have already enough check plugins for the cloud? And if you look at it, I think it's quite extensive. There are a lot of things. It can be much, much larger, of course. Could be much, much more. But when we looked at our cloud monitoring, we actually said, let's take a step back. Let's re-evaluate. Because to understand that, you understand the Checkmk logic. So in the Checkmk logic, we basically always say we only ingest only relevant data. Then we build with that services. We discover these services. That's our responsibility to come up and have the idea what to do. And then you can basically build dashboards and tune alerts. And that works for many systems quite well. And it sounds much, much easier than it is. Actually, we spend quite a lot of time, because what we have to do as part of that is we need to build data models inside Checkmk. We need to think really about how we can get all this data and model that into something more abstract, into hosts and services. Because this is what you interact with, but like hosts and services are something which we put a lot of love in because it's really the juice of Checkmk. But you need to have an idea, or we need to have the idea, how do we basically build these hosts and services, and what hosts and services do we create? And when you want to monitor a complex system, you have to reverse the thought process, because then you have to actually start thinking from the result from the dashboards. When you have the dashboards which you think makes sense, you can think, okay, what kind of hosts and services do you need to be able to build that? And then in the end, what kind of data do you need? Because only that path will work for complex systems. And for example, let's just take the example of Azure. Azure is actually quite a complex system. Let's just look at how stuff is organized there. So you have a tenant, you have a management group, you have a subscription, you have a resource group, you have a region, you have resources, you have then resource entities, and you have metrics, logs, and status. And that's just one, and that you have basically all across the board. So it gets really complicated then. And if you want to be able to monitor such a thing in that complexity, you really need to think about the result. And that's why what we basically started doing in the last month is to say, hey, what would you want to have as a user from a monitoring perspective? What kind of perspective do you want to have, and what different lenses do we need to provide? So that in the end, we can give you an opinionated monitoring. It's one of these things, I think, which are really important, that we provide you insights into your IT without you having to search and dig for the stuff. And as a consequence, what we need to do is to redesign our monitoring architecture. And that's what we plan to do for 2.5. So that based on this complex setup, we rethink how do you do the right setup for that in a scalable way, so that you can monitor a lot of things with just an easy setup. That we think about what hosts do we want, and especially what piggyback hosts we need. Then what are the right labels, host labels? What is the inventory for the hosts? What kind of services? What kind of service labels? What kind of service metrics? In the end, what rules and what dashboards? And why is this now important? Because I think it can really elevate, in the end, then the monitoring experience which you have when you do cloud monitoring. Because in the end, it's not just about the scope that you can cover a lot of things. It's about creating value for you. Yeah? And if you think along the paths around ingesting only the relevant data, this needs to be low effort. It needs to be something which you can do very quickly, very easily, but also scalable across, for example, all Azure subscriptions or AWS accounts. It needs to be with high performance, because you actually can get quite a lot of data, but it needs to be able to consider a lot of different use cases, because every one of you has actually quite a different setup and will need very different amounts of data. And then the magic comes in, because then we can actually give you insights into the cloud. We can have hosts and services which are much more intuitive than today, so that when you look at it, it starts to make sense a lot more, and we can provide you opinionated monitoring. That when you start with the cloud monitoring, you will learn about all the things which are broken immediately. And then in the end, that you get also the visibility, because we can then build great dashboards for you out of the box, but you can also then have all the meta information with inventory and labels to build powerful notifications and to build your own dashboards. And we'll, of course, also enhance, as part of that, all existing services which we do, and also add a couple of new services. Because with the right foundation, it's much easier to extend it. And now the big question is, for which of the 3 providers do we want to do it, or do we want to do it for all 3 providers? And there we looked a little bit at what are you using, and our best proxy was the support tickets you open. And actually the one which got the most support tickets, I don't know if it's actually good or bad, or if it's because the other things are better, but it's also, when I just speak with you, it's basically a thing where we hear most of you're using, and that's Azure. And that's why we decided for 2.5, we focus on redesigning our cloud monitoring for Azure to provide you all these things. Now we go into configuration, and for that I brought a little bit of a story. I think it's a standard challenge which every software company has. And when you think about it, it always boils down to one of these abstractions, and it's basically I painted it as a planet developer, and you have a planet user. And I game a lot, and when I play computer games, sometimes I really think, do you actually play the games yourself as developers? And that's the same thing which you sometimes ask us, do you actually use Checkmk yourself as developers? Because, I mean, if you would do that, why would you do things like that, right? And so what we try to do and have been trying to do over the last years more and more is to build bridges between the planet developer and planet user. By the way, of course, it's the same planet, just different perspectives on it, and get the developers to visit the planet user. And how do we do that? It's, quite easy. So actually, Tanya and Jana do that very often. They go to people who actually have never used Checkmk, who have maybe used Zabbix or Isinga or PRTG, and then they try Checkmk for the very first time. And then they actually record that, and then they share it internally. And it's extremely painful to watch. Really, I can't watch that because you see users trying to do very simple things, and for me it's really like, why is it so complicated? Why don't you know what to do? And you see them fail at every single step of Checkmk. And maybe remember when you tried to use Checkmk the very first time, remember how your experience was then. Or if you have new colleagues in your team which start to use Checkmk, how the experience is. Because for you, you might now see all these things. Yes, okay, if I entered the wrong host name, then I ideally delete it because renaming is so expensive and doesn't really work. But if you're a new user, how can you know that? And that's because for you, you all know all these things. And the problem for new users is that Checkmk is full of these hidden assumptions. Assumptions which you can't know as a new user. And we start to forget it at some point because we all know these things, right? When we look at such a simple page as add hosts, we all know, but we as developers, we expect the user knows that. So as a user, what do you need to know? The first thing you need to know is that the buttons on top don't work until you have filled out stuff on the bottom. And at Checkmk 2.0, when we basically decided that everything is on top, which is an action, we had a big discussion, should it be on top or on bottom? And I actually don't know why we ended up on top, but that's how it is now. But it's actually quite problematic for users because they will not know that they need to first need to fill out settings before they actually can click on something there. But then also, if you're a new user, how can you know what a service discovery is? This is really Checkmk specific, especially the way we do it. And then you probably typically have no idea how fundamental a hostname is. And then if there's a hostname already there, it's not so easy to change it. So you should not just enter anything into it. And even if you understand, okay, that's a hostname, most people actually don't know that, for example, Checkmk has built-in DNS resolution. So they actually enter IP addresses, or they do everything in there. And they enter IP addresses because they don't know that you can actually enter an IP address here because, you need to first click on it to be able to do so. How should you know about that? That you first have to click and then you can enter an IP address there, right? And then, I think I even myself struggle all the time when users ask me, what is the difference between Checkmk agent, API integration, when do you need to use SNMP? It's really complex. So the data source configuration is something where I think every new user just like, what is that? And then, if you have understood all these things, what most people actually also, when they're new users, don't know that for example, if they don't do SNMP, but if they want to monitor a Linux or Windows host, they need to first install the agent. So we actually said for 2.5, we need to improve that, because this is one fundamental step. In every release, we actually started to tackle fundamental steps. In 2.3, we started with, for example, acknowledge problems, schedule downtimes as operator steps. In 2.4, we worked on the notifications. And for 2.5, we said we need to work on these first steps. And we, for example, took the monitoring of a Linux and Windows host as a challenge. How can we make that better? And to understand what you all need to do, we basically try to break it down. What are the steps which are required to get there? And it's all these steps. And there are different ways how you can improve it. One way is maybe reduce the number of steps. That's what we did with Checkmk Cloud Self-Hosted, where we have the so-called auto agent. If you have configured that, then it's actually quite easy because it does the other steps in the end. For our SaaS product, we went even simpler. You only need 2 steps. And that can be a solution, but it's not the entire solution. We need to also work on the individual steps. So therefore, we picked the steps. I think installing Checkmk and opening is quite easy. It starts at finding the agent. Most people don't know how to find the agent. In Checkmk SaaS, we built something very simple for that. Checkmk SaaS has a little bit of an advantage there because we have a lot more information about our system. Our idea is we need to build something to get users there. It will be very different to what you see here, but it might follow the same idea. Then for creating a host. The problem is always when you have entered the host and have clicked on save, you can't come back. It's like it's not reversible. So the idea is that we need to just basically stop you before you have clicked on save if you've done something which might be not the right thing to do. To basically pull the error messages a little bit earlier, not when you are later in, for example, if you have saved and then you try to change stuff and you can't do it anymore. And there are a couple of simple things. For example, if this is not resolvable and if you haven't entered the IP address, we can just warn you about it. So quite simple to make the life easier. But also, like the typical thing is that, I mean, we have seen that in all users tests. Most people, they don't know and they don't see like when do you actually install the agent. Yeah? And we can actually catch the error because we have the test connection feature in Checkmk to see some information around what we can do. And typically, one of the things which you see, if you actually can connect to a host, but there's no port open on that or the agent isn't there, then you get a refused connection. Yeah? And we can basically utilize this information to pull the errors forward that you don't basically end up at the step where you can't get out of it anymore. So that we basically warn you a little bit earlier. So a lot of simple things which will make the life a lot easier. And then registering hosts, it's actually crazy because you actually go from the UI, then you have to go command line again, then you do the registering, then if at some point if you use the update, you have to register again. It's something which people don't understand. I promise in 2.5 we'll get that finally, that you can use the updater to register both controller and updater, and you only need one command anymore. And once we've gotten then back, we're back at Checkmk, we do discovery of services. This is just always problematic. I would really like to completely redo that. We discussed, can we completely redo the service discovery page? We decided this is such a big project that we at least can't do it completely, but we can at least improve a lot of the error functionality, a lot of the error finding, and be much more explicit and help users guide them a little bit along the way. And for example, if it doesn't work, that you get better error messages and that you're pointed then towards where you get stuff done. And this could be something very simple that, for example, if connection is refused, in this case, just imagine it would be connection refused, that we say, hey, this is something which could be the error based on information which we get, and then point you to the right way that you, for example, just here's the agent, this is how you can download and get it basically working. And now let's go to the most exciting part, activate changes. And activate changes is really like if you're not used to Checkmk and you have added the host and think you have done everything right, but nothing happens, right? You're there and like, it's crazy because you watch them try to use the UI and they try to figure out what's wrong and they don't see this little yellow button on the top right. They always miss that. And at some point when I watch these things, I really get like, I don't understand how one can be so calm when seeing users do that. And therefore, it was very clear for us we need to fix activate changes. And there are 2 things which we'll do. The one thing is make it a little bit more logical. That's a very simple idea because you actually look on the left. If there are changes in the setup, just show them in the setup. Tanya had the idea. It's, I think, a really nice idea. And then the other thing is, we have the slider now. And this is an idea we actually showed in Checkmk 2.1 in the roadmap. I think it will now basically become reality that you can do activate changes on the fly, that you don't have to go to the activate changes page, but you can do them right out of the workflow. You don't have to open a new tab anymore. You can just basically open it, click activate changes, and you're not disrupted in your workflow anymore. Okay. This is the first part of our roadmap talk. We have a lot more in store. So in our second part after the break, we'll talk about all the other changes that we have planned for Checkmk 2.5. And until then, enjoy the coffee and cake.